been thinking about the first question to ask you for a while now, and I think the most appropriate for you, Robert, is after the years that you've been doing this. After the famous Sailor series that people received extremely well, I'm going to ask you, what is money?
I'd be lying if I didn't say I saw that question coming. Um, I this is such a weird question, actually, and one of the latest things that I've learned, and we released an episode recently that was titled "The Most Important Question in the World," and what it was essentially a composite of prior guests on the What is Money show answering the question, what is money? And my editor did a great job of slicing these together. And one of my takeaways from that particular episode, we released one of these, we released a second one. I think we've got 2 or 3 more in the backlog. So we have like 4 to 5 hours that we've accumulated of guests answering that question, what is money, over our 300 some odd episodes that we've released now. So it's been very interesting. But my takeaway from that particular composite episode was that it seemed to be asking the question, what is money, seemed to be a kind of a psychological mirror, perhaps, in that the way that guests answer the question is somewhat telling of their own character. Now, this is a hypothesis. I'm not saying that this is a conclusive fact. It's just an observation I made after we released it and I listened to that episode. And a for instance would be like, if you listen to the Sailor series, he'll describe money as the highest energy that humans can channel. Or I think he also calls it something like an amalgam of all the powers that humans can possibly harness, right? So you can use money, for instance, to acquire or channel kinetic energy, chemical energy, gravitational energy, thermal energy, et cetera, et cetera. Money's like this meta structure that lets you tap into really anything that humans are capable of harnessing. And so his answer to that question, it kind of tells you something about Sailor's, perhaps tells you something about Sailor's actual psychology, and that, well, he's a powerful guy. He's an effective entrepreneur. He's a historian, right? He's thought deeply about these topics for clearly many years. He's very widely read. And he's, focused a lot of his reading on like ancient Roman history and other very successful entrepreneurs like Carnegie and, the oil tycoons, steel tycoons, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like his perspective on money, not only is it telling about kind of the nature and structure and ontology of money itself, but it's also revealing something about the actual individual answering the question too. And then if you go forward one series to the Booth series, Jeff Booth will give you this very academic description of how money works and how it flows between people. But then he also takes this step back and says something like, to the effect of, money doesn't really matter. It's more about love and relationships and belonging. And so that seems to be kind of telling about how he individually chooses to lead his life. And I don't know. I'm not maybe answering your question, what is money per se, but it's just the thing I've been thinking about recently, is that asking that particular question had this very unexpected result that just occurred to me, like I said, when we released this thing a couple of weeks ago, that it seems to be serving as a psychological mirror of sorts, that in which you see the subtle or perhaps deeper character of the individual answering the question reflected. And that's been, I don't know, like it just caught me off guard. So like every time I feel so fortunate to have launched this show. And then now the whole world, you got Ray Dalio on national TV saying that the defining question is, what is money? And then you've got Elon Musk making these big appearances saying, what is money? It's like, it seems to be like it's quickly becoming the defining question of our era. And maybe in 50 years' time, something like that, we'll look back on it as such. So I feel very fortunate to have kind of struck gold, digital gold, perhaps, or posed a question that's very concordant with the current zeitgeist. I already had that gratitude and appreciation in place, but now, again, watching that composite episode, it blew my mind again. I was like, oh my goodness, wow, you're actually seeing something else about. There's a conversation beneath the conversation, right? There's a response beneath the response to the question, and I found that to be fascinating. And again, I call it a psychological mirror. I don't know. This is like a term that I've put to this thing that I'm trying to describe. But it's interesting to me, again, that it's most of the answers we have for money tend to have this reflective property. That money is not wealth, but it reflects wealth. Prices are a reflection on the consequences of human action in relation to capital. And, I think this speaks to the relationship between money and human rationality, that human rationality is this self-reflective faculty that we have, and money somehow enables or extends that we're actually able to extend human rationality into the material domain in a very real way. So, just a very, very interesting question. And I'm just grateful to have it as the namesake of the show, and it keeps yielding more and more insights to me. So, yeah.
And it's interesting because I did notice when Elon answered that question about, and what was striking to me was his response, which was basically along the lines of, there needs to be inflation, right? So you could tell that he hasn't fully taken the orange pill, and then the Ray Dalio clip, I'm very familiar with it as well. But I think what was fascinating to me about what you just said about is the way that you look at money is really a reflection on yourself. And I think that people really underestimate how vital money is in a society, right? It's the Hodlonaut said it best, right? It's half of every transaction in the world, right? And if that base layer is fundamentally corrupted or it's broken, right? I think there's so many downstream effects to that, so many consequences to that people have no idea what the root cause of are. But I'm going to double back. I'm going to go back to the original question because I'm very curious, Robert. What is money to you specifically as an individual?
Oh, it's a great, great question. And now that I've made that meta step talking about the psychological mirror, I'm extra cognizant of my answer. But when I originally, this is before launching the podcast, I'd always thought about money as time, and this is something that I incorporated into Masters and Slaves of Money in particular. That was looking, I think the opening line in that piece is like, money is a tool for trading human time. So an ingredient to basically everything of value in the global economy is human time. You could also call it human effort or human energy or human attention, perhaps. But the common denominator that I always focus on was just time itself. And I guess the reason I did that was because even in the term, like the term economize, right? It means to accomplish the same or greater result with less effort, the same or less effort, right? You're actually increasing output per unit of input. And so what we're doing when we trade with one another is allowing each of us to specialize in a very fine stage of a production process, and then interlink ourselves together through trade, such that the thing that we ultimately make is something that none of us could ever make individually. We get these incredible innovations and There's a great essay on this titled I Pencil. If you've never read it, it's beautifully poetic, describing essentially how no individual on earth can construct a pencil. That it is this emergent good from, the wood is from this continent, the lead is from that continent, the metals from here. And it takes all of these people engaged in a collaborative effort to create something as simple as a pencil. And so I still, Sailor blew my mind when we started talking about money as energy, because it was like, oh, of course it's energy. I'd never thought about it that way. But my original view on it had always been that it's more time than energy. But ultimately, I guess the deeper I've gotten down this rabbit hole, the one thing I keep coming to is the insufficiency or inadequacy of language itself. There is that. I had this guy shared a quote from Ray Kurzweil on the show, who said that language is a very thin pipe through which to describe something as complex as consciousness. And I feel that really landed with me. We're all human beings. We're all living in this complex, fluid, fully interconnected reality. Right? It's a continuum, right? The world continuum, that everything affects everything else, everything touches everything else, either directly or indirectly. It's all energy, it's all liquid, something like that. And with language, we're slicing it and dicing it, right, into little discrete data packets, such that we can talk about it, we can think about it, we can reflect upon it. And I think maybe that question, what is money, is like, it's pointing at that, right? It's like, if we call money this, we call money the language of value. So clearly it's linguistic sort of in its nature, in that it allows us to communicate about, the consequences of human action. One way I've thought of framing this that was useful for me was, if words are the media of exchange of human conception, then money is the media of exchange of human action. Whereas, like, maybe even your five senses are the media of exchange of human perception, right? We're actually perceiving the world with our five senses. We then convert that and wrap it into these little discrete data packets called words to develop conceptions from that. And somewhere between there, perception and conception, we get this emergent socioeconomic phenomenon called money. That's the medium of exchange of human action, right? So it's actually, it's a very high signal communication device, and somehow supersedes language, or is very hard to describe, obviously, which again explains why so many people have so many different answers, and perhaps also explains why it functions as a psychological mirror, because if it is that complex, it's like it can be answered in a lot of different ways. And when you attempt to answer it, it's kind of like in quantum physics, right, where the observer participates with the observation. If you've ever heard of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, the act of observation actually changes the thing that you're observing, so that you can never know simultaneously the exact position and trajectory of a particle. You can know one or the other, but you can't know both. With it's a continuum, right? The more you know the trajectory, the less you know the position, and vice versa. So something about what is money, it's like, what is the word, what is language? And obviously that's a very deep question too, when you look at something like the biblical corpus, right? The opening, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Like, there's something very essential about this intermediation, this intermediating function, I guess you would say, that both language and money performs. And it is exceedingly difficult to describe, but also exceedingly important.